Welcome to today's webinar, Storytelling, Discover the Big Picture for Agile Efforts with our good friend Tom Cagley. Today's hashtag will be Agile Big Picture. We are XBOSoft and we are dedicated to software quality improvement. Founded in 2006, we speed products to market with our expert software QA consulting and software testing. We have global teams with offices in San Francisco and Beijing. Today's house rules. Participants other than the speakers are muted. And if you have any questions, please ask them in the GoToWebinar control on the right-hand side of your screen or through Twitter, and you can tag us at XBOSoft and use the hashtag. Questions may be asked throughout the webinar, and we'll try to answer them at the end. You will receive information on the recording at the conclusion of the webinar. I'm Rachel Geibig, Marketing Manager at XBOSoft, and I will now hand it over to Phil Liu, CEO and founder.
Hi, thanks, Rachel. It's great to be here for our quarterly webinar, and this week, or this quarter, we have a special guest speaker. His name is Tom Cagley, and I met Tom a few years ago, and just recently hooked up with him at the last conference in San Diego, the Software Quality and Practical Testing Conference, and we had some pretty deep discussions about requirements and stories, especially in Agile. And so I decided to invite Tom to be our special guest speaker this quarter. Tom doesn't really need too much of an introduction because he's very well known in the industry. He's co-authored a book on mastering software project management. He's been consulting and working in the IT and software field for many years. I don't want to say how many years because it would how old he is, but that's okay. He's a great conversationalist and thinking about different concepts in Agile as well as in life in general. And Tom, it's great to have you here. Where are you going to be traveling next?
Well, thank you, Phil. I think next week it'll be Agile Philly, Agile DC, then off to Sweden, then off to Brazil. So
wow.
Getting around. So just trying to make sure I use up that whole passport before I have to renew it.
Okay, well, without further ado, I'll just let you start your talk. I'll be taking questions from the audience, and for those out there in the audience, please feel free to write your questions in the question panel, and I'll be sure to insert them in and get Tom to answer them if he can. If we don't have enough time for all the questions and answers, we certainly will post them on our blog. So Tom, I'll let you go ahead. Whoa, here we go. Storytelling.
All right, thank you, Phil. It's funny, this whole idea of storytelling, some people think of it as very squishy and sort of fuzzy kind of concept. I was doing a sales call this morning and getting a set of requirements. This organization wanted to approach an agile transformation. And so we were going through just sort of line after line of requirements kind of thing. And I looked up and looked at the person that was leading the conversation, who was a very tough person, and said, I know this is going to feel a little squishy, but maybe you could tell me the story about where you want to be in 5 years and how you might think that you would get there, obviously in terms of Agile. And the person reacted probably a little bit negatively, said that wasn't necessary, but then turned around and about 3 minutes later did exactly that. At the end, they went, well, I guess it's this storytelling stuff isn't as squishy or fuzzy as I thought it would be. But and that's because it really is part and parcel of who we are. Just human beings in general love stories. We've put stories on cave walls. We've, the first pieces of literature that we have, stone tablets, things like that, whether it's religious or historical, are stories that resonate with us. And that goes through all sorts of time frames. When we talk about Agile, I think the whole Agile movement really has reminded us that it's an important thing to focus on requirements, on outcomes, rather than just that collection of what's and hows and needs and things like that, because nobody can string them together. It doesn't make sense in a narrative fashion. It feels right, it feels nice, cold, and clinical, but very frankly, it's not how we want to relate to them. And in reality, it's not how we perceive how we will move through the future. And I think that's pretty critical. And, given that it's in our DNA, and we obviously have embraced all sorts of different Agile, and I know that this is, the picture in front of you is very Scrum-based, but it doesn't matter in terms of any other Agile framework. If we're doing XP, or if we're doing DAD, or if we're doing any of the other scaling kinds of techniques, we still have things like backlogs, which are really a collection of user stories, perhaps, or other kinds of ideas about where we want to go, what we want to do, and we continue to drop those things, we deliver. Our goal is to progress forward so that we create something that wasn't there, even if it were doing maintenance. It's all about moving it forward. So, I think all of us would recognize that in Agile software development, Agile maintenance, Agile enhancements, we are attempting to package something that we can look to, whether it's a sprint, iteration, release, that is a coherent set of functionality that people will like. That I would suggest is truly a story. I'm a big fan of the whole concept of backlogs. Obviously, backlogs make, I think, a ton of sense in terms of building out a sort of a coherent journey through a project. But when you first start, whether it's iteration 0, if you're doing an individual sprint or iteration, individual team, or something larger at a program level, then we generally tend to start with something that is a much higher level of context. I think probably many of us have in the past experienced having people hand us cocktail napkins with a picture and perhaps one or two sentences drawn out on them that describe where we want to go in the future. That has never really gone away. We are always attempting to predict the future. Human beings, I would suggest, might not be the world's greatest predictors of the future, but we set that big high-level context, that outer level of the onion. And so I'm actually leveraging, for those of you who are not familiar with it, Mike Cohn's, the planning onion that Mike Cohn popularized. But at that outer level, I would suggest we can use storytelling, using sort of the big picture story, the business journey, future telling, those sorts of concepts to actually describe where we want to go. As we drive down internal to that, obviously we peel it back. We have features, functions, architectures. As we peel back even further, epics, themes, stories, all the way down to tasks and activities. All of those are premise. Yes.
Just a quick question came in from the audience. They're wondering, what elements of context is interesting or useful in an Agile story, so to speak, that they should include. Usually, we're just talking about the user will do this, the user wants to do this, and what other elements of context do you think are important to put in a story?
So absolutely, Phil, and I think you're absolutely right. At a user story, which is that almost that bottom level, I think that's exactly what we think of as user stories. Somebody will do something for a specific reason. I think if we peel back and go to the top level context, it is more of a description of where the business will be. It's where the business will be, what the outcome will be for the business, who will be involved, those sorts of things. I think you could almost tell it like a business novel at that point, and have that even in more depth. It's a paragraph. It's not a user story kind of thing. So it's a much more in-depth description of how the organization will exist, what it will be delivering, and who will be involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
You think that makes sense to whomever answered? Excellent.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I was just at the PNSQC conference a few days ago, and somebody was mentioning about how they were working with an offshore team, and the offshore team, without really understanding the context of the application, it was really difficult for them to write good tests.
I 100% agree with you, Phil, and I think that high level sort of vision, and you could almost consider that context story almost a vision of where you want to go and the route you want to take. I think that provides people a test so that when they write a test or they write a user story or they're working down that path, they can look at that and say, am I living within this vision? Does that make sense as to what I'm thinking today based on the fact that I want to go from Washington, D.C. tonight to Cleveland, Ohio? And I want to get there before 12:30 at night, and I want to feel good in the morning and all those kinds of things, even though I have to go to Chicago to get there. Do those things make sense? So I think it does give them a great deal of context. Right. And that's why it's important to understand this whole idea of where backlogs come from. And arguably we could have the discussion about which came first, the chicken or the egg. But it really does boil down to we have to have something to extract the backlog from. Now, I think we all have grown up where you go out and you get a whole bunch of BAs, they run out and they interview people and they do all this stuff and they bring it back and they create a requirements document. And back probably late last century, that's the way we would have done it. We might do it a little differently and create user stories or use cases or some other methodology today. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't hold together as an overall story. It doesn't tell us where we're going to begin, where we're going to end, how we will know that our journey is done. And that's the reason I think you have to start with telling a story, telling and setting that vision kind of scenario that we as an organization, if we're doing organizational change, when we make this organizational change, we will be somebody else. Just to give you an example, an organization I recently worked with, it was considering this whole idea of going through a transformation. It was a combination of Agile and other kinds of things. But what they really wanted to do, because there's all sorts of ways to get to that kind of thing. What they wanted to do was to create a workplace that was highly innovative, highly collaborative. And those were really sort of those gut levels. So getting the stakeholders together, they were able, through a process of future telling, to actually describe, if they closed their eyes, waved a magic wand, whatever metaphor you want to use for that, they were able to describe what the organization looked like and felt like. When somebody came to work 5 years from now, what would they be thinking about? How would they act? And then from there, we could back down. We could actually start to set up. We could start to set up goals. We could start to set up ideas for what the individual steps, what the individual user stories might look like. They then could create a backlog of changes Obviously, the ones that were closer in future time were much more granular than the ones that were more glittering generality that were a couple of years out. But every one of the people participating in that change, and in this organization it was all 42 people, could look at that story. Everyone had it. They printed it big and put it on the wall. Everybody looked at it every day when they walked in. They knew what the intent, where they were heading was going to be, even though they were working on the minutia of getting there day in, day out. So it was quite a powerful tool to generate a backlog and then communicate that so that people could resonate with it.
I see you've got some white eggs here and black eggs here. What's the context of this picture here, Tom?
Oh, well, again, it was, is a backlog the chicken or the egg kind of thing, and I like the picture. It was a market in Beijing, so cool. I collect my pictures as I go.
Okay.
By the way, where do you fall on that idea of which was first, the chicken or the egg?
Geez, I think the egg was first.
I would tend to agree with you, but you can get into a very philosophical discussion. But obviously, if the first chicken had to come out of an egg, it may or may not have been a chicken who laid it.
That's true.
There are stories. Stories are a very deep part of how we act as human beings. There are all sorts of different patterns for stories. Interestingly enough, for those of you who are not familiar, there's a gentleman named Joseph Campbell who looked at myths and teased out one of probably the most common story pattern, and that was the monomyth, otherwise known as the hero's journey. So if you've ever watched a Star Wars movie, you've seen the hero's journey in action. At 2 o'clock a couple of days ago, I woke up in my hotel room and realized that I needed that I hadn't heard from the office who was supposed to send the teacher, not the teacher, but the proctor for the exam that we had Wednesday at the end of a class. And so you wake up and you can't go back to sleep. So I popped on HBO, laying there in that hotel room, and there was the brand new Star Wars movie, the most current one. And the two young protagonists, both didn't want to participate, but were sort of coaxed into taking the journey and reaching the end where they found Luke Skywalker. That is a direct representation of the monomyth. It's a classic story pattern. Almost everyone in the world, without being told, will recognize that. Lord of the Rings did it. Almost every movie that you ever see follows that hero's journey. Most common structure. You start and you go through a journey cycle, and you get to the end and you succeed. Those kind of patterns are important because, very frankly, when you're crafting a business story, when you're crafting a vision, everyone who participates needs to understand sort of the steps along the way, or at least consider that there are steps along the way. It isn't just we're going to describe where we want to go. One of my favorite for small stories, if we go back one page just briefly, is Freytag's pyramid. Freytag's pyramid is actually, if you've ever watched a Super Bowl and seen one of the Budweiser commercials, the horses and the little puppies and things like that, it is a very common pattern that I would suggest is very useful for things like status reports. Not even the idea of where we're going in terms of vision. Has a start. You have a build-up of action, and then at the end, you have some form of completion. So you form a cycle. People like cycles. Things like the mountain are just variations on that. Other useful patterns, again, I use these as reference. I like people to understand that there are other different ways of keeping people involved. And Phil, have you ever gone to a meeting where you start the meeting, somebody's walking through a status or walking through a progress report, and they get about 5 or 10 minutes in, and if you're not, if you're sort of off to the side and look around, you see everybody on their phone, and they're not paying attention. They're not present in the moment.
Well,
so,
I think
what do you do?
I think that's common no matter what somebody's talking about these days.
Yeah, but I think there's ways to keep them involved, keep them present, without pitching a fit or bringing in a cell phone jammer. Which, by the way, I was at some place that actually was using that to keep people off the internet during long meetings. It was sort of the brutal way around. But there are other ways, right? You can make what you're talking about interesting. Things like the false starter redirect, where you go down a path and then immediately cut over to something else. Tell concentric circle kinds of stories, the nested loops. I mean, these are very powerful techniques to keep people involved, especially if you're going to ask them for money. So if you were giving a status report or going to your project board and you needed something for them, what you don't want them to do is to check out 5 minutes into the conversation when you're going to ask them for $40 million at the end, or another person, or something else. Because if they're not engaged, the answer can clearly be no. That's where storytelling, not just at the big picture Agile level, it's where storytelling is a very powerful tool to keep people engaged in what you have to say, so that you can get to the end and get people interested in it. It's a methodology of talking and communicating with people.
Yeah, the redirect or false start is an interesting one. I thought that was just when somebody loses their train of thought, but that's actually a real methodology in presenting something, huh?
Oh, absolutely. And again, there are those, and it's happened to me before, that you do lose your train of thought. I've done roughly 440 podcast interviews, and every once in a while you'll run into somebody who will be telling or talking through an interesting point, maybe even telling a story about it, and you can just hear it in their voice, and they lose it, and they just don't know where they're going. But there are others that they get into it, and they start down a path where it seems like it's a foregone conclusion, and your attention would naturally wander away, and they immediately change tacks on you, so that you can't stop listening, or you will potentially lose the thread of where they're going. Again, doing it on purpose, not overdoing it, obviously. Otherwise, people will just think of you sort of as a late night TV talk person.
Okay.
There are, for business stories, having practiced this for a long time, there are 6 basic elements, and if you were telling or writing a business novel, I'd probably add a few more to these, but in any business story, you really need to have some statement about who the story is about. People need to be able to connect. If they don't connect, they will stop listening. You need to describe what's being done, or what will be done. I mean, again, when you're doing things like trying to tell the future, and again, I'm not saying you should try to predict the future, but this is our vision as to where this project will go, this change will go. Here's how we're going to become an organization that has very high quality. You need to give them that goal, that big what, so that they can plant the flag and start to rally to it. Indefinite or loose or loosey-goosey about, hey, someday over the rainbow, while Liza Minnelli and her mother sang those songs so well, we're not in business to do something someday over the rainbow. What we're interested in is, hey, we've got to go from point A to point B. That going from point A to point B will be a journey, but we need to know when we'll need to get there, because a good time box really allows people to start to prioritize. It's funny. In my discussion earlier today, the whole transformation, the one thing that until the end, and I actually had to directly ask the question, that was missing out of that whole discussion was why they were doing any of this. Phenomenally profitable, healthy organization. People don't change unless there's a good why. And just waving your hands in the air and saying, hey, the great change is coming someday, that you'll have to change, I don't think motivates people. So defining why is a mechanism to drive people forward. And then, the how, and I'm a big believer, maybe I've been too long in the measurement world, that you need that whole idea of having some mechanism of having quantitative evidence for your assertion. Just asserting something has no value to me without either having evidence or knowing where one can collect evidence. So if I was describing a transformation, the quantifiable evidence describes our pattern of how we get to done. It's that thing that allows us to say we've achieved something. It isn't that we all just want to feel good. We have to have some mechanism. Let's say we're doing quality. That tomorrow what we're doing and what we're delivering is of higher quality, if that's our journey along that line. Now, I don't think these are hard elements in terms of trying to remember them. But if you look, you picked up a status tomorrow, or you went and picked up a project vision, you might find some of these elements here, and that's why I would suggest that 9 out of 10 people might read a project vision once. If they read it the second time, that they're really looking for a mechanism to help them through a bout of insomnia, because it doesn't resonate. It doesn't drive them. It doesn't lead them to the future. Got a little carried away there.
Yeah, I think that it's very interesting that you mentioned the why. I think that's missing in a lot of stories that I've seen in terms of why at any level, either a high level or even a low level, the why is often missing.
Oh, I agree. And just that whole idea of user stories, it drives me crazy when people, and again, there are user stories I heard described sort of as a barnacle on Scrum, but they do make sense, but they don't make sense if we don't know why we're doing it. So here's the person that we're affecting, or the group that we're affecting. Here's the what. Well, what's the benefit? That's the why. And again, that's a mechanism, partially a mechanism to prioritize, but it's also a mechanism to motivate.
Mm-hmm.
And let's face it, how many times do you go off and do something for no apparent reason, even if it's not, there's no benefit to you, whether it's financial or pleasure, you just do it because you're a zombie. It doesn't happen. None of us do those kinds of things. We all are motivated by something.
So,
or at least we think we are.
So if you're saying why, if you're putting that in the story, really you're talking about, so what's in it for me? And who would that me be? Would that be the me would be for the user or the stakeholder, or what would you say about that, Tom?
Well, again, if we're talking about a project vision or an effort vision or program vision, I think there probably are multiple stakeholders involved. And the why, there might be multiple whys. There might be, or at least that why, if there's only a single why, needs to resonate with all groups. And that's why, not to overplay the word why, that's why I think it's important to then drag them back in, have them participate in generating that story, and have them qualify it in terms of, hey, this does talk to me. can they stand up in front of the people, their peers, and tell that story with a straight face? Phil, do you have an elevator speech for your organization?
Not one that I can tell with a straight face.
Okay, but you have one, whether it's fun.
I'm just kidding. Yes, of course we do.
I mean, that's a business story. It probably has many, if not all of those elements in there.
Yeah,
now, some of them are more. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was saying, yeah, I mean, that's a good idea to really go through anyone's actual story and make sure that it has all of these elements actually, because people think in different ways too. These different elements of a story, people listen in different ways, and so you can make sure that your story actually can be heard by different types of people as well.
Absolutely. So I've been working in telling and helping people describe stories for a while, and obviously it resonates, I think, right off the bat in terms of things like product or project visions. But the reality is almost every form of communication can be told as a story with those basic elements. So what we're looking at here is some of those elements are more or less important. Sometimes they can inherit their elements from other things that have happened before. I don't think status reports, if you actually have to do a status report, ever should be more than one page. It should focus on the journey, those sorts of things. But if you had to repeat everything, it might be an enormous document, and again, be very useful for holding doors open. But if we think about them for a second, when we're doing a product vision or project vision, the whole idea of scope is a pretty important kind of element. So the who there. If we talk about a status report, more than likely that's known, so it becomes far less important. Maybe has to be dealt with. Status reports are what, when, why, how, and evidence kind of thing can typically take a much more tactical flair. Whereas that whole degree of why and how are really strategic when we're talking about product vision. So again, I think all of these things are important. All of these elements are important to almost every story we tell in a business context. Their degree of being tactical or strategic changes based on what we're doing. I use a story is a far more tactical thing than a product vision. So they may be needed, but they may be needed in a little bit different context. And I'll show you an exercise at the end, Phil, that I did at Agile Philly a couple of weeks ago. That really was sort of a fundamental shift in my thinking in terms of how wordy these kind of business stories had to be. So we'll look at that a little later, just to make sure that our audience here doesn't think that when I'm talking about a story that I'm really talking about all three books in the Lord of the Rings and that many pages to tell a business or a business story or product vision, those sorts of things.
Okay.
The whole idea of doing this is not ad hoc, and especially it's not ad hoc if this is your first time. Sort of like riding a bicycle. The first time I rode a bicycle, I had to have training wheels. It's probably actually a bad idea, but I had training wheels, and I still had my father run behind me holding the seat up so that I wouldn't fall down. I almost suggest that storytelling sessions in business environments that are not used to them, you need some degree of training wheels, because as I was talking to another business storyteller the other day, sometimes people don't, they look at this as, I don't want this touchy-feely stuff around me kind of thing. And Phil, as you know, I'm not one of the touchy-feeliest kind of guys. So if there's no value to it, it makes no sense to me in a long time. But if you're facilitating one of these things, you first have to start by gathering some information to set the context. There's pre-work to be done, both for you as a facilitator, and I guess maybe I am a mean guy. I like to give the people who are going to participate before they get in the door some pre-work themselves, so they come in qualified to have the conversation, so that they're not having long, impassioned discussions about what the topic really means. I also, and as a facilitator, you probably recognize this, and I've seen you work a crowd at conferences myself. You have to have a set of seed questions. Now, like we do in a podcast, right? There's a set of seed questions that I typically, agree upon with my interviewee. It's not the goal of asking the question. It's a goal of having those ready in case the conversation falters. So those sorts of things. And then the other thing that I think is really critical, maybe the most critical of these items in terms of being ready to facilitate one, you have to listen. As a rule, if you're the facilitator, I would suggest that your goal is to talk under 10% of the time. And if it becomes about you, you failed. You might as well have just interviewed yourself, kind of thing. So I think those are pretty critical sort of attributes and setup points in terms of getting ready to facilitate one of these kinds of storytelling sessions. When you actually, as pre-planning, you're going through building that context, that set of seed questions, you have to establish what that goal of that storytelling session is, so that you can communicate that to whomever you're going to invite. This isn't ambush. If people don't think they belong, they probably don't belong. But they have to be primed to come into that room, or if they're doing it out in the quad, in an open area, they have to come there knowing that this is the kind of thing that they'll talk about, or they'll wander. The goal isn't to do this, take 8 or 9 weeks, unless you want to, go on a vacation as a team, those sorts of things. And then you have to do the logistics of the session, fumbling around with looking for cables for laptops if they're necessary, flip charts. So the other day, it's not that even people who do this professionally don't sometimes make this mistake. I was ready. I was in a room. I was doing the pre-work, getting ready, everybody ready. Walked in, put my laptop down, and lo and behold, my laptop does not have an HDMI slot. Or luckily, to my knowledge, it didn't. So I couldn't connect to actually put up the sort of the ground rule slides and things like that. And we fumbled around. We lost time. People got anxious. They started to wander off. So that sort of basic blocking and tackling in terms of facilitating these things are pretty critical to get this ready.
What's interesting to me, Tom, is you say the logistics for a session and it take 3 hours, half a day, or something like that, and a lot of people may respond and say, "Well, we don't have time for that."
Yeah,
right?
I think we've all heard that one. But somebody, especially if you're doing a multi-million-dollar project, and sometimes you don't need obviously that long for a piece of work that might take a couple of weeks. You might need an hour to set up and describe where you're going so that you can flesh out. But if you're doing a large program, you need to get these. You need to have some sort of collaborative focus around where it's going, what sort of vision, and having it written up and having somebody say, "Well, that's okay, check the box." I think that you don't get the level of fidelity. I don't know that I would do a big project, or at least I would explain to people the risk of not being able to clearly and articulately build a vision for a large piece of work. If they couldn't do that, I don't know why they really want to do it. They want to outsource it to somebody else, and then they want to say, well, that's not what I wanted. Well, aren't we back in the late 1980s, early 1990s again? And when you would do these big projects and install them, and the sponsor would look at you and go, I'm sorry, that's not what we really wanted. I don't want to be there again. And I really don't think they want to be there that again. So I think having that conversation as a facilitator, as a leader with them, can move that ball down the court to try to get them over that 3.5 hours. I don't have that in my life. So obviously you're going to have to pick people, and the people portion of this discussion is pretty important. Very frankly, getting a homogeneous group together will end up with a fairly predictable homogeneous answer. This is not ad hoc. You want a good diverse group, and diversity is different kinds of people, different kinds of knowledge, so that they can all contribute and help you to describe where you want to go. Assign and pre-work. And to be honest with you, I tend to over-identify. If I need 10 people for a session, I'll identify 15 or 20. I will hand out the pre-work, have them do the pre-work. If they can't or won't do the pre-work, they don't get invited. And so it's sort of like airlines. Sitting in an airport right now, I know when I get to my gate, they're going to say this flight is potentially oversold, and they do that because they know a number of people will not show up. At least that's what I hope that the reason they're doing it. Do the same thing in terms of identifying, use that assignment not only to prime the pump, but to also use as a pre-qualifying tool to knock people who aren't going to participate out. Set those framing questions up, and you are just at that point, you're primed and ready to go. You got a place to be, you got people that are going to come, they know what they're going to do, and you know how you're going to keep them moving without having to resort to cattle prods or other weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in framing questions, Tom, but maybe you'll get to it later on with an example or something.
Well, I don't necessarily know that I have that in this text, so we might as well talk about it now. So let's say you were describing, or you wanted to do a storytelling session on reorganizing a test organization, so that it's more embedded with development, more of an agile kind of flavor, so that you weren't doing testing like a TMMI level 2 company where you're doing testing after development kind of thing. You want it to be part of the process. So that you might set up and have people do the pre-reading so that they understand what one of those looks like. You then would, given your context with the organization, you might have a set of seed questions or framing questions that helped people to say, hey, when they start getting stuck in a thing, you've gone off and done research and say, well, tell me about how you would train software testers, let's say, that have never been part of a development team. How would you train those people? Could they be trained so that they could talk and interact with developers? What would that look like? That would be a kind of a seed question, a little bit more leading than I would like, but it helps the team once they start slowing down, if they haven't covered that topic, to start talking about not only if that's an attribute they want their organization to look like when it's done, but how they would progress down that path. The session itself, so the day breaks, and you actually pull these people in the room, super glue the door shut, you set up your cell phone jammer, all of those good things so that people can focus. I found this very simple sort of outline to work fairly well. You provide them with an overview. If they have never done this before, walk through a couple of exercises, including the one we'll look at the end here, that tells them how to do this and what a story might be. Sometimes if they haven't done that, again, it's not as common in the workplace as it should be. Break them up into multiple cross-functional teams. 2 is probably a good number if you've got 10 people together, and have them separately answer the question. Go through and build a story in 2 separate teams. Have them then debrief the group, telling those stories to each other. And what you're doing in this circumstance is to actually get them to listen and to sort of see that each group might have a slightly different paradigm. Again, both should be cross-functional. They'll have that conversation, and that gets us into a scenario where once they've debriefed each other, you can then start pulling it back together. Have them, put their tables together, their chairs together, perhaps in a circle, and take those individual stories and put them together, and you end up with a coherent vision and a path to go down the pipe. Again, we're dealing with relatively high-level pieces of information here because, very frankly, we're going to let practitioners do the breakdown. Practitioners will do user stories later on. What we want here is that goal and that path that the organization wants to take to get down that path. When you're done, obviously, I'm a believer in testing. So one mechanism that I've used over and over again is the lean change canvas that's been described by Jeff Andersen. We'll look at that in a second, but in essence, test to make sure that you actually describe where you want to go, that you've hit most of the major points, and so that when people leave the room, you have something that maybe needs to be wordsmithed a bit, but it has the entirety, or at least the outline of where you're going. That outline, that story, then can be communicated to the whole organization because it is a consensus of that larger body. The leaders, perhaps the most senior leaders, the stakeholders of the change, will be able to use that to communicate with.
That's interesting, Tom, because I'm wondering. You say communicate to the organization and the whole team. Would that be best done verbally in a meeting, or done via an email or some document or something like that?
I am of the belief that the most intimate communication that you can leverage is the best. So face-to-face meeting, teleconference, where people talk, other people can interact, has the highest fidelity.
Right.
I think we all would recognize that sticking it in an email tends to have lower fidelity. People don't read it, misinterpret it. They can't ask questions. It's much harder.
Sure. I'm just thinking about our modern day society, right? So people don't read emails, or they don't get, sorry, I didn't get it, that kind of thing, or I don't have time to go to the meeting, or they go to the meeting and then they're on their phone doing texting and whatever while they're in the meeting. So that's just that's just what.
Now, yeah. So interestingly enough, I saw an organization that one of their mechanisms to deal with that was they had the meeting, everybody was invited. They also videotaped it, and they also then sliced off the audio off that video so that they could turn it around and that people could then re-listen or re-watch as a video, video blog or a video podcast or an audio podcast, so that people then could consume it over and over and over again in case they missed parts of it while they were, texting with their wives and children, kind of thing, or taking pictures and putting them up on the internet that, to advertise the process, kind of thing. So,
Right.
I mean, there are different ways to communicate, but
Sure.
try to start as intimate as possible, kind of scenario.
Sure.
And as I said, I think Jeff Andersen's Lean Change Canvas is a phenomenal tool to unpack that story and to determine whether or not you got all the elements, that are important. Now, obviously, there are far more elements in this Lean Change Canvas, but it does provide an indication of whether or not you've talked about how you'll know if you're successful, what the vision is, how it will be communicated. Those kinds of items, I think, are a good idea to talk through with the group so that they know how it works and where it goes in the end. But just a quick sort of technique to get there.
Six-word stories. All right.
Oh yeah, so this is a phenomenal sort of a game to help people understand the power of stories. And typically, so here are a couple of quick six-word stories. I learned them where I was describing, you could tell a six-word autobiography. Mine is, I was born, I slept less, I had fun. Six-word sort of autobiography. These, you can get a sense, a lot of information and ideas in just 6 words. And the constraint helps people to think through basically all of those individual attributes of a good business story. And even with 6 words, you can get a lot of information through in this case. I love the one, dot in the sky, dead pixel. And as a photographer, I can know beyond a shadow of a doubt when I'm looking at a screen and I have a dead pixel, you can see it and you're going, oh, is that a bird up there, or is it a dead pixel? So it tells a lot, even in six words. So what I did was, what I do in these storytelling sessions, especially as you're teaching people this, is to start with and ask them to do a 6-word story about the project that they're currently working on. Have them use just 6 words to describe it. Then give them some training in terms of how to tell stories. Part of this deck, the attributes of a good story, the fact that they have to have some sort of a plot, that whether it's the monomyth or Freytag's triangle or the mountain, those sorts of things. They understand that there's a cycle to any story. Then, about halfway through, you have them write a 6-word story again about the same project. And then finally, at the end, you ask them to do it again. And what you can see in almost every circumstance is a progression over just that, even an hour, 40 minutes in terms of talking about stories. They get much more succinct. They get much more pointed and visually oriented in their words, which then translate to a better vision of the project they're doing, or heck, even if it's a status report. Using that level of constraint and that visual representation, I think gets them to the point of being able to communicate significantly better. So the game, just as I've stated, pretty simple. You write a 6-word story at the end of the session or in the middle of the session, you write it again, and you are able to, show the progression. And everyone can then look at what they've done and see that they've changed. So why don't we actually go to a sample? By the way, for those of you who get to do this with me in person, I always ask whether or not I can actually use them. And obviously, if you said no, I wouldn't do it. Typically, people throw it away if they say no. But it's a good idea if you're going to use these in different circumstances that you actually ask for permission, kind of thing. I wouldn't want somebody to wake up and go, I didn't tell you could use that 6-word story about my project. Now I'm embarrassed, kind of thing. But we actually do have an example, I think, on the next slide that shows a couple of people's progression over a discussion, and they're fairly small to read. But the first one, arrived during chaos, transformed to improve, ended up becoming, that was what it was, and it ended with evolve culture, serve team, improve effectiveness. Fundamentally talking about the same project, but by focusing on those small number of characteristics, thinking about the fact that they wanted to describe a journey, even in 6 words, using that constraint, it becomes much more evocative, much more interesting. And I think if you looked at that and the team looked at that, they could see their story in that far better than a 15-page status report or a vision that talks about how, in MBA language, how we were going to improve quality and become world class and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, interesting. You have transforming to improve, and then the last one is serve team and improve happiness. That's quite a difference.
Yeah, it is, and it is fundamentally. I think it's the same story. It's the same person. I remember when this person read it out in class, and you could see over just learning a little bit about storytelling, the light go on, and it was much easier for that person to actually communicate about the project and the goal of the project that they were, why they were doing it. And so storytelling is I think it's useful in business situations. We do it all the time. Sometimes we do it because we're trying to throw a lot of smoke in the air, but almost everything that we do, whether it's a document about requirements, whether it's a vision of a project, whether it's a vision, for a new program, or something as simple as an email or status report, we're telling stories. They help us see the future. They work because they connect to people. They show how work will be done, a plot, those sorts of things. But it's not magic, and it does have to be planned out. You have to approach it, and in general, if you're talking about future telling and it's something to transform an organization, you have to involve the stakeholders and the people that are directly involved in terms of describing what they think the future is. So those are facilitated kinds of sessions. So storytelling, Phil, is part and parcel, I think, of business, and it's not just ad hoc. You don't wake up and write War and Peace tomorrow morning just because you decide you're going to be an author. Not even Tolstoy did that.
No, I think this has been great, Tom. I mean, a lot of people talk about how most of software defects originate in requirements, and yet we don't really spend enough time really digging into requirements and stories in the Agile context. And I think this has been really helpful for me, and I hope for our audience as well.
Super. It was an absolute pleasure. If there are other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, we're going to be posting the video, but Rachel, are you there?
Yep. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Registrants will receive an email with information on where to view the recording and the slides from today's webinar. Make sure that you keep updated with all of our webinars, reports, and white papers by following us on Facebook, Google+, or LinkedIn, and also make sure to follow us on Twitter. If you have any questions or if you have ideas for future webinars, go ahead and send us an email or hit us up at Twitter.